Yeah, good morning, everyone. Um, I have um, been going through a lot of material in preparation for the retreat that we're having in a couple of weeks. And there's so much good stuff. There's like so many wonderful teachings. Uh, and yesterday, uh, I got down to just four that I might teach this morning. And then I couldn't decide, and I figured, okay, I'll wait until the last minute, and that way I can see what's like present for me in the moment. So this is, I'm going to start off with something I found that I don't know its origin. I know it's from Norman Fisher, um, and it's about feeling and perception.
Mm.
So this is what Norman says.
Maybe you can turn
Um,
it louder just a little. Yeah, go on, go.
oops, hang on. There we go. Feeling is our somatic, deeply conditioned reactivity to anything that we perceive. We always have some reactivity. Before we know what we are experiencing, we have a gut reaction to it, a primitive reaction to it. We either have a positive reaction, wanting to incorporate it, or have it, or make it stay, or we have a negative reaction, wanting to escape from it, get away from it, or make it disappear. Maybe we have a mixture of both. Or maybe we aren't paying attention and don't even notice what our reaction is. So it's a very primitive, basic reactivity. It is based on that reactivity that we have perception. The whole bundle of experiences that constitute our lives, the things we see and notice and think about, are based in perception. We identify things of the world. They may or may not be there in some way, but we really don't know. We think that they're there in a particular way because of feeling and perception. The Buddha understood that perception is not a primary experience, it is a concoction, a conceptual process. The Buddha recognized that we are actively making the world we live in, and that the world we take for granted is not necessarily the world that is there. It's a world that we are creating. Our life is a life that we are creating through our reactivity and our perception. Well, that's an extraordinary claim. So, this phrase, we identify things in the world, they may or may not be there in some way, but we really don't know. How could that be? You know, what does it say about the phrase eyewitness? We assume an eyewitness is someone who knows what happened. when I was in sixth grade, my sixth grade teacher did an experiment which evidently was running around the country at the time. It was too little at that time to know, but it was. And what he did is he had a sixth grader from a different class come into our room to tell him something or ask him something. And they got into a confrontation that escalated um, and ended up with the teacher taking the kid by the shoulders and, you know, basically pushing him out of the room, not harshly, softly, but, um, and then closing the door. The teacher closed the door and went back to the front of the room and said, "Everybody, immediately take out a piece of paper. I need you to be witnesses of what happened because, you know, I'm going to have to whatever." And so everyone, like, filled with all this, like, about what happened, sat down and write what they wrote. And then he collected them. And then he opened the door. He went to the door, opened it. The kid came in, and they hugged. And he said it was, you know, a scene they created because he wanted to demonstrate something. So he went on and read a whole bunch, I don't remember how many, of these things we wrote about what we had seen and heard. And we were astounded how different they were. Just incredibly different, not subtly different, incredibly different. You know, people had perceived differently what was occurring. I sit here now amazed that uh, that exercise ran around, you know, American schools in 1962, which is when this would have been, right? And here we are a million years later, and we still like ignore that fact. We just completely ignore it as a culture. Or maybe the whole world, maybe human beings completely ignore that a group of 30 people witnessing the same thing see 30 different things. We have, at least I have, been sort of committed for many decades to the idea of uncovering the truth. I'm not so committed to it anymore. I'm not so committed to it anymore as I realize how can I uncover the truth when everything that I encounter through my senses have to go through my perceptual system for me to create an understanding and a story about what it is that I heard or saw or thought or tasted or smelled or felt in my body or in my heart. It says here the Buddha was a little ahead of me. The Buddha understood that perception is not a primary experience, it's a concoction, a conceptual process. And so it's not just, you know, an experiment a teacher does, it's our moment to moment experience that says here the Buddha recognized that we are actively making the world we live in, and that the world we take for granted is not necessarily the world that is there. Every single one of the 30 kids in the class wrote the truth. All of them wrote the truth. None of them lied. None of them intentionally made up what they wrote. They wrote down what they perceived. And lo and behold, it was a creation, a fabrication, a formation. It was not the direct experience of what was real. This is what we do as we walk through the world in every moment of our lives, living in a state of delusion. Not because what we see isn't true. Of course it's true. It's what we're seeing. It's because we don't walk around mindfully acknowledging that everything we see is filtered and constructed through our perceptual system as a result of the organic nature of our bodies, of our species, as a result of the way senses work, as a result of all of our life experience shaping our preferences, our sense of not just preference in the sense of I like this, I don't like that, but you know, sometimes at sunset, when the lighting is very different than it normally is, I can sit outside and look at the trees, and suddenly there's like a shift in my perception. And I'm actually looking more at kind of like the way that the light is moving through the spaces between the branches. And it forms a whole different, like a figure ground thing. It forms a whole different perception. And when that happens, I realize that I walk around with a habitual perception of what the land outside my window looks like. And that, my sister's dog looks at the same thing and sees something else. Probably my sister sees something else. Probably we all see something else. It's really important that we pay attention to that. It's really important that we don't get locked in to believing that we are seeing directly what is. We're seeing what we perceive. We're hearing what we perceive. We're smelling, we're tasting, we're touching, we're thinking what we perceive. Yeah, I really liked a teacher pointing out that, in fact, we've never seen anything in our lives. All we ever see is the reflection as photons bounce off things and then hit our retina, and then we interpret what we're experiencing, as a result of the way the photons hit our eyeballs. That we're seeing photons, or we're seeing the perception of how our mind processes the experiences of, the photon dance on our retina. My response to realizing that is joy. How unimaginably incredible is it that we're able to do this? That I can walk through the world without bumping into things. I can appreciate colors and patterns and line and form in all sorts of ways. I can have a deeply emotional response to the ocean, to the sunset, to a forest, to a rock formation, to water, to people I love, all through the sense of sight. And yet I'm actually never seeing anything other than what my brain, comes up with as a result of, the impingement of photons. I mean, how awesome is this? How incredible is this? How delicious and complex life is. And that's so helpful as a reminder when I get bogged down, which happens all the time, bogged down and worrying about this or being concerned about that or fretting in this way and worrying in this way. And, you know, the sense of pressure that I feel pretty much all the time that I need to do something about and then fill in the blank. There's always something I need to do something about. Um, and it can really like weigh me down. It weighs us down when we don't recognize the joy of being a living being, the joy of having a perceptual system, the joy of making up this story that we live in. Sometimes I think, and there's a lot of teaching that supports this, that we don't experience the joy because we feel imprisoned by everything that goes on, that we feel bound and fettered and chained and in a way that's true. Because without mindfulness, all of our habits of perception occur without any agency on our part. They just arise habitually. And we aren't trained in our culture on how, or maybe in any culture, how to choose. How to choose, how to respond, how to understand all of the different experiences that arise through our perceptual system. Part of that confusion, at least, one story I make up is that it's our commitment to the truth. That somehow, even though 30 kids wrote up 30 different descriptions of what occurred, something really occurred. That we believe there's a truth, that everybody, got it wrong, or this one got it closest to right, or it's very hard to recognize that there were 30 truths, that they were all true. How could they all be true if it was different? Right? This is where we often live, in this place where, well, that person doesn't see clearly. They don't see the truth. They're making up lies. And as though we weren't making up what we're calling the truth, as though it wasn't all made up. There's a different basis for choosing our actions in the world, for having agency over what we think, what we say, what we do. The Buddha talks about intention. What is the intention that is arising as part of this thought, as part of what you're saying, as what you're doing. What's the intention behind it? What's the intention that is being activated? Again, not something we're trained in. This is what we need to train ourselves, is to know the intention. And often when we're told this, we get lost in thinking, because in order to know the intention, I have to do a lot of thinking, because I have to come up with the name of the intention. And now that I know the name, what's that all about? And where did it come from? And how come this? And what's that? And the more we get into an incredible mental process over the question of what was the intention of what I said, the more we do that, the further we get from the direct experience of what I said, of knowing what I said. We we go wander off into the thought country and move far and far and far away from knowing. So the Buddha said there are only three things to pay attention to when you're trying to work with intention. The most important one is the intention kind? Is it kind? The Dalai Lama always says, my religion is kindness. This is exactly what he's referring to. That his intention is to be kind. If everyone in the world was kind, if no one in the world was cruel, we could all go like this. The second, which goes right along with it, is to make sure that the intention causes no harm, that the intention is harmless. Again, imagine that everyone in the world worked diligently to make sure that their actions, the intention behind any of their actions, cause no harm. Now it's even a bigger relief. Oh, what a great life. I live in a world where everyone strives really effortfully to be kind and to cause no harm. And the third um, focus for examining intention is restraint, which is to say, if the thought, if what you're saying, if what you're doing might be unkind or might cause harm, restrain it. That's all. Don't just watch and go, oh, look at that. Kind, unkind, kind, unkind. I'm spending my life watching. The intention of the practice of mindfulness is developing kindness, developing non-harm, and restraining thoughts and speech and actions that might be unkind or cause harm. the ability to do that is supported by the understanding that perception is fabricated. If what you're perceiving is the absolute truth, it becomes confusing. What's kind, what's not kind. If you know that every sense perception is fabricated, then the question is this fabrication kind or unkind? Not is the external reality kind or unkind. Once it's clear that the fabrication is kind or unkind, you can choose. You have agency now. You can choose what to think, what to say, what to do. If you see someone causing harm, anger might arise, hatred might arise. And the Buddha teaches that anger and hatred are not going to solve the situation. Knowing that the perception of this other doing harm is a creation, and you want the thoughts that arise in relation to it to be harmful, not harmful, which anger and hatred are, but understanding, caring, concern. You see someone causing harm, and perhaps the first thing that comes up is, oh, that poor person. What suffering they must go through to cause them to act in such a harmful manner. I wonder what I could say or do to help relieve their suffering. That's extraordinarily different. In fact, mostly everybody I know would object to that. I have plenty of people in my life who say, no, that anger is wholesome. It motivates me to act. It also clouds your heart and mind and body with anger. And in the long run, or even the short run, a clouded heart and mind and body is not as effective as a clear one. There is certainly something to do about the other causing harm. But the something to do should be known through the lens of non-harm, through the lens of kindness. And we should restrain the lens that arises filled with hatred and anger and say, oh, no, this is not good. This is not kind. This causes harm, this anger. I will restrain it. I will withdraw consent for it to be present and move my focus of attention to something else, to some other way of responding. This is all difficult work. This takes a lot of time. And you know, I really think that at its core is the necessity of joy. That without joy, it's very difficult. uh, to do these kind of actions that are in a way against the stream of what our training is. You know, anger has been exalted all my life. You know, harm is kind of built into the system I live in. You know, in order to succeed, somewhere harm must go. And I reject that. But to reject that is it's really difficult. So we need the support of joy, of loving curiosity, Bob says. I like that. We need the support of joy to hold the clarity of the fabrications that we live in, that we create, that guide our feelings about things, our thoughts about things, how we react and respond to things, all guided by fabrication. And the most inappropriate thing to do is to hate that we live in these fabrications, to be consumed with the need for there to have been one single truth. What actually happened between this kid and the teacher? What actually happened? There was definitely a reality somewhere in there. No, there is not. And that's the source of joy. That we create the worlds that we live in. And that being the case, if we begin acting in the world solely out of kindness and non-harm and restraining unkindness and harm, we're creating a world we love to live in. We have the agency to help create the world we love to live in. Not easy because, it's hard to find support. Well, fortunately, we have a community. Maybe we have multiple communities that we're connected with, different friends or family or people we know, people we just study with, even just people we just read their books or listen to their podcasts. All of this is a community of support. Support for you to create a wholesome life that you can live in. So let's practice this. Let's practice paying attention to the arising of feeling, of thoughts, to the arising of intention, and to watch very carefully. Is this kind? Is this kind?